Uh, Hello. Thank you so much, Christos. I know everyone, when I first got an email with like a link to one of my GitHub repos saying we appreciate your work. Do you have submissions for this conference? I initially thought it was like a phishing email. didn't I didn't understand that it was real, because why is, you know, would anyone outside of a handful of users notice my very weird collection of Byzantine shell scripts and uh, you know, archaic tray user interfaces in Pascal. But yeah, and then I realized, oh, this is real. This is amazing. I came up with a proposal, and this is just such a cool opportunity. So thank you so much. My background is a little strange, so prepare yourselves for that. It's kind of, I've moved between IT work and education slash academia, just back and forth. So I've been a research assistant for religious studies professors. I've also been a system administrator, a computer teacher, a history teacher. So yeah. And okay, I maintain lists and some very weird software. Some of this I'll read verbatim, and some of it I'll try to wing it. Roughly 3,775 years ago, a Sumerian man dictates the following to his scribe. Take cognizance that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection, because you have treated me with contempt. Everyone knows this guy, right? Nani, and Ia Nasir, the unscrupulous copper merchant. I bring this up because Nani has the honorable distinction of being the first person in human history to write a customer complaint, almost 4,000 years ago. And, there were other complaints discovered by archaeologists. One man, Imgur Sin, writes to the same copper merchant, Ia Nasir, do you not know how tired I am of this? Switching to another silly slide. And Nani, shares via these tablets that you promised, my friend Gimel Sin, that you would give him great ingots, but you didn't do this. And basically, I'm sharing this because I believe that this is also the first recorded incident of deceptive advertising. Obviously, Ia Nasir had built up a reputation and went around saying, I have great copper, please buy my copper, and people were buying it. And people were getting quite disgruntled. And basically this exemplifies two elements of the thesis I'm at least attempting to present to you today, which is one, advertising is ubiquitous, and humans have been confronted with nefarious advertising practices since the dawn of civilization, basically. And advertising, at least when it works, is a self-replicating phenomenon, which makes it rife for serious misuse and abuse. Ian Nasir's correspondence also reveals that he belonged to a coalition of merchants known as the Deal Moon Traders, which illustrates that even people in 18th century BC Mesopotamia also had to deal with predatory business conglomerates. Yeah. And what most stood out to me from all of these tablets is that a lot of these complaints convey an exasperation in his customer base. And I think a lot of us can relate to that today. And I believe that the preponderance of ad blockers and content filtering and network filtering solutions available to us is a sort of saying, tired of being treated by rubes, like rubes by advertisers, and we too are exercising, our right of rejection, if that makes sense to anyone. So advertising has been around in some shape or form for a extremely long time, and what my goal with this presentation is to explore a major byproduct of pervasive digital advertising and telemetry, which a lot of people have noted has become kind of inextricably linked with advertising, especially digital advertising. And I believe that this constitutes a subversion of human agency, basically, of our ability to exercise control over our own lives, to an extent, even our own thoughts. And basically, these forces kind of work together to undermine self-ownership in a way, and especially ownership of property, our devices and our data, mainly. I hope to highlight how the commodification of attention and personal information facilitates developments like vendor or platform lock-in, and to address some overlooked contexts in which this has manifested in other problematic ways. Here we go. Everyone knows the meme, right? Everyone's seen this. It's kind of funny because he became such a notorious character, and then he lives on through these memes. He was able to self-replicate in the form of memes. It's very funny to me. Over the past 2 decades, global spending on digital advertising has seen a significant increase pretty much every year. Estimates show an expenditure of more than $700 billion on this form of marketing from across a wide variety of sectors in the past year alone. Oh boy. Where's my stats? I made that with some kind of ChatGPT thing. There we go. So some charts. The trend is painfully evident on platforms and operating systems that millions, if not a few billion people use for work every day, for work and recreation. And some of these operating systems are transforming into ever more efficient vehicles for ad delivery and telemetry, which, is increasingly difficult to differentiate from spyware in a lot of contexts. I feel it's important to emphasize that digital advertising has become really inseparable from tracking in the vast majority of contexts. targeted advertising kind of creates this vicious cycle of, wanting to produce ever more efficient ads to generate more revenue and wanting to collect more data to generate more revenue to create more effective ads and yada, yada, yada. We all heard of the Cambridge Analytica stuff. So our data is commodified to the point where it's sold both in legal markets and in sort of clandestine gray area illegal markets. Here we go. That too. I hope you're enjoying these. I do a whole section on basically how terrible Windows 10 is. And most of this applies to Windows 11 as well. And this is also, interesting because most users don't know, the average user wouldn't know how to deal with like such an overwhelming amount of ad integration. It's kind of insane the level that Microsoft has taken it to. With the release of Windows 10 in 2015, Microsoft began integrating advertising and telemetry into their desktop OS at unprecedented levels. Adverts began to appear on the login screen, on the desktop post-login, in the start menu, in the search UI, even through pop-up dialogues. The categories of data collected by and transmitted to Microsoft were also greatly expanded. So handwriting and voice recognition, text selection, search queries, auto-completed terms, running process names. I'm sure you're all familiar with how bad it is. Along with that, Microsoft rolls out this kind of highly restrictive, compulsory Windows update policy, which a lot of users complained about. I hope I'm doing okay on time. Oh, thank God. Still have 10 minutes, I think. Oh. Once I get past the Windows part, it'll be a lot more smooth. So yeah, it's freaking nuts. It's out of control. So if one wishes to use, I don't know why anyone would want to, but if one wants to use a recent version of Windows, they're either going to have to block a ton of IP addresses and domains, at the network level or via their host file, which, can be subverted by the OS itself, can be bypassed by the OS itself, rather. Most users are not going to go through that trouble. Some enterprising individuals have taken it upon themselves to sort of build custom images of Windows 10 and 11, like ameliorated and some other custom ISOs, which, more advanced users can figure out. But then you're also dealing with broken features, like you won't be able to receive any patches from Microsoft unless you jump through hoops. It's just a pretty insane situation. If you want to, be freed from all of this bombastic assault on user freedom from Microsoft, you're really going to have to expend a significant amount of time and energy, especially if you're not familiar with alternative operating systems. And most people just aren't going to do it. So it's essentially a captive audience situation, much like all of you. And this is some people, what some people call dark patterns on Android. Some of it's, sort of self-promotion. I lump it all in as advertising. This I found, obviously, through Google Images. But yeah, you get the idea. It's kind of, imagine you don't know how to deal with this, Imagine you're the average user. You'd get pretty annoyed pretty fast, Like, what are you gonna, how do I even deal with this? What am I gonna do? iOS is less brazen about it. And Mac OS or OS X is also far less brazen about how telemetry and advertising are implemented. I will, note that, though they still do it a bit, as you can see. Okay. Obviously, the situation with Android and to a much lesser extent, iOS is the same. The average user walking around with the average Android device is sharing not only with Google, but with OEMs data like application usage, typing habits, SIM card serial numbers, Wi-Fi MAC addresses, autocorrect, voice, location data, contact data in some situations. Little crazy. And it gets even worse with OEMs, And it's similar in that situation. If you want to escape this beyond just, mitigating it through blocking it via DNS or third-party utilities, you're going to look for an alternative variant or distribution of Android or ROM. But you have to make sure it's compatible with your device and make sure it's compatible with your carrier. And you have to boot into a recovery environment and you have to copy partitions. And again, like 99% of users just aren't going to do it. So they're stuck. Same with iOS, with iPhones. There's not even alternative, you can't have an alternative distribution of iOS, which I guess is at least pretty cool. You can do that with Android and AOSP. Okay. So, feature creep. Everyone's seen feature creep. Everyone knows what feature creep is. I put a cool little Dilbert comic there. Has been regularly observed in the world of proprietary commercial software, and this goes doubly so in the mobile device arena, where it is all too often paired with new encroachments on privacy and new ways of delivering ads. The rise of smartphones and similar mobile devices has been an undeniable influence on the direction which commercial desktop operating systems have taken, and this is much to the detriment of our privacy. Commercial desktop and mobile operating systems, I feel, have reached a point of convergence where, ads and tracking that would normally only be found on mobile platforms have been, aggressively making inroads into commercial desktop operating systems, which is pretty concerning. And I feel it's no longer even like a unidirectional influence. I think it's bidirectional. We see commercial desktop platforms and commercial mobile platforms kind of borrowing from each other at this point. And this, I feel, sort of represents the trend perfectly. It's a perfect representation of where things have been headed. My computer morphs into computer, into finally it graduates to just this PC, a managed device. And okay, now I can just get into the cooler stuff. This has even affected open source projects. I love Mozilla, by the way. I love all of your stuff. I use Firefox. I use IceCat. Even when I was used before I fully moved over to Linux, was using Camino, if you remember the Camino project, for Mac. That was a pretty cool project. But, mainline vanilla Firefox does include some telemetry and some advertising. You can modify options. That's important. You can, go to about config. My user JS file is probably like 250 lines at this point, but I still use it. And what you guys do is highly, highly important. And if Firefox and Mozilla disappeared, we'd all be kind of fucked. But this has resulted in a growing number of forks, etc. And lots of people have discussed Manifest v3 in a way that is far more involved than I plan to, so I don't even have to address it, but it does present, challenges and limitations to the development and maintenance of ad blocking extensions and a variety of other extensions. But I don't really need to get into that. Anyway, this is the cool part. So the growing prevalence of advertising and telemetry is obviously not limited to for-profit entities or producers of software. Much as they do in Meat World, nonprofits, political organizations, and most disconcertingly governments, but it also goes on with governments all over, and on the other side too. It never ends. Most disconcertingly governments, basically, have gotten in on the action as well. Digital realms enable advertisers and promoters to amplify the effects of traditional advertising models at scale, on a much wider scale, and to far exceed the boundaries of those models. Efforts can manifest as camouflage-sponsored content or aggressive astroturfing, the former, what some people have been calling native and blended advertising, and which some lawmakers have attempted to combat through legislation, even. And then we have projects like Sponsor Block, which is pretty cool, but we talked about that yesterday. I don't have to go into it. I'm sure many of you have used it. But there's still a varying fusion of advertising and legitimate or actually useful information, and this shows up in a lot of content that Sponsor Block seeks to, enable users to skip. It shows up in both mainstream and independent journalism. We see kind of these duplicitous, clickbaity advertising methods to increase user engagement, and it's kind of all over the place. Basically, so much news is clickbait. It's hard to keep track. And news platforms, as we all know, are riddled with advertising and tracking. Michael Parenti once said, "You don't know you're wearing a leash if you sit by the peg all day." One need only visit any single high-traffic social media platform to see just how true that is. We've all seen brand loyalists and ideologues just endlessly spouting the same talking points to the point where it's spam. Maybe some of them are bots, but some of them are certainly people. Richard Stallman calls them victim co-perpetrators, which I really like. Julian Oliver sees the overwhelming presence of advertising in our world as a new kind of dictatorship that one cannot escape. Through sheer ubiquity, advertising has become if not the, driving force shaping our cultural zeitgeist. Yet, the online variety is so remarkably effective that, to me, it constitutes a pernicious threat. I was going to share some Slavoj Žižek. You all know the God, I've had to skip so much. You all know this, right? You've seen his documentaries. He's pretty cool. I'm already eating from the trash can all the time. The name of this trash can is ideology, and the material force of ideology makes me not see what I'm effectively eating. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Don't worry. Okay, so back to more practical stuff. We have a ton of methods for blocking ads. More traditional stuff like hosts files, proxy auto configuration files, a variety of DNS measures. We have great products like AdGuard Home, OpenWRT has tons of plugins. There are caching proxies, non-caching proxies like Squid and Provoxy. There's just so much stuff we can use. I'm, shelling a little bit here. And there are, efforts to kind of bypass ad blockers like kill ad block, and thank God there's a ton of workarounds, so most of them don't work unless the webmaster is psychotically determined to make them work, There's stuff that we can't really get around or can only mitigate, like server-side ad injection. There's stuff that's kind of challenging for filter list maintainers as well. There's some sites use seemingly randomly generated class names and such, which make you have to constantly update your lists. I wanted to end by addressing what I initially attempted solely to focus on. Is that okay? Okay, thank God. Thank God. Okay. So I wanted to tackle at the end here kind of as opposed to a technical challenge for ad blocking and content filtering, a more institutional one. I don't know how many people here live in America, or if I assume a bunch of you do, though. If you've ever taught in the American school system, especially the public school system, you may have encountered content filtering options that schools choose to use, often on Chromebooks, sometimes on other devices. But GoGuardian, have you guys heard of this? Okay. Bark, Gaggle, these are content filtering solutions meant to keep students away from inappropriate content, and I guess they do that job, but they're also essentially surveillance tools. So classrooms all across America are kind of replicating the worst, side effects of pervasive digital advertising and telemetry in the name of content filtering. They're using these applications in a really concerning way. There have even been cases where, teachers have been able to activate student webcams remotely. It's just kind of psychotic, and they build profiles of students. Behavior can be automatically reported, even to law enforcement. It's nuts. And I think there's an opportunity for, companies like AdGuard and eyeo and Malwarebytes even to maybe sort of spark a shift in those environments. Because wouldn't you rather students use solutions like that and schools use solutions like that than these draconian tracking and surveillance tools that may get kids arrested for, mentioning anything questionable? I've had to administer some of this software. It's atrocious. But I did work at a private school that first hired me as their sysadmin. And I wanted to end with this little anecdote. Rather than, deploy something like GoGuardian, rather than use any of the draconian, invasive content filtering measures, I just basically was given a lot of freedom to sort of build a computer room and sort of do things the way I wanted to. And I kept it really simple. I used OpenDNS Family Shield for, the router in the student classroom. I kept a personally curated list of questionable domains on a network drive. I set all of the computers. I basically used a single Windows image that I configured to update the host's file every 1 to 3 days from a variety of sources for additional blocking of inappropriate content, but also of ads and telemetry. I eventually wrote my own little shell scripts and got the school to switch some student machines over to Linux, which was pretty cool. And as opposed to engaging in all of that sort of invasive GoGuardian stuff, I basically tried to use it as a teaching opportunity for students. And some students were quite interested. Eventually, we're able to work on Raspberry Pi kits and do all sorts of cool stuff. It was a really neat experience before I made the mistake of going to graduate school. But I'll end with this. You all know John Perry Barlow, I'm sure. No? EFF hosts a lot of his essays from back in the day and stuff. Pretty cool guy. He wrote in 1996, which is coincidentally the year I got my first computer. So he writes in 1996, "We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. Your legal concepts." John Perry Barlow. "Your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. They are all based on matter, and there is no matter here. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before." Things obviously did not pan out that way. There's a whole alphabet soup coalition monitoring our interactions. There's corporations and governments seeking to influence and shape public opinion. It's gotten kind of dystopian. Social media platforms are basically sales tunnels at this point. They're glorified sales platforms, essentially, and advertising platforms. And AI is used. All of the machine learning stuff is used as pretty much by most people to outsource their capacities for understanding and independent analysis. By most people, not the people in this room. I'll skip to the last two sentences. Okay. So, but we do have on the nascent decentralized web a bevy of, software and hardware projects, whole operating systems, whole platforms and devices where the raison d'etre is user choice, is user consent, is user privacy. These are great. These are awesome. There are even alternative models like the one envisioned by Brave. I love that stuff. Which I think is amazing. There are all sorts of options for people to say no to being commodified or having their data commodified. And I think that these are the alternative that I hope one day becomes the norm. That's it. Ooh, I went over time. I'm used to, teaching kids, and I've done some stand-up comedy, so this is my first time presenting to a whole room full of sober adults. Sorry, I went over time.